The one thing that I really wanted to talk about today is integrated pest management. I've had several phone calls over the last little bit where people are calling and asking about a disease or a pest that they've had in their yard and how they can control that, the best way to control that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about integrated pest management and how that process works. So the first thing is to explain what integrated pest management is.
I was going to say, yeah.
Integrated pest management is taking several different approaches to manage the pest.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just focusing on one aspect of pest management, such as chemical control, we look at several different ways of controlling that pest, starting with the least toxic method and going from there. And then if it still becomes a really big problem, then we'll start managing with chemicals.
All right. When you say less synthetic efforts, are you looking at just a matter of chemicals in that case?
Well, not just chemicals. There's other things that we can do. For example, there's actually 5 steps in the process of integrated pest management. The first step in that process is monitoring or scouting. So you go out and you look for that pest. Has it been a pest in the past? If it has, then you go ahead and make that application, or you start looking for it so that you know, okay, now it's time to go ahead and do that.
Okay, but you don't want to make the application of the pest control in advance of seeing it, do you? Or do you want to go ahead and do that and knowing that, for example, a plant has had a problem with worms or caterpillars of some nature, that I go ahead and apply some sort of pest control then? Or should we wait till we actually see evidence?
With an insect, I would say wait until you actually see the evidence.
Okay.
Because a lot of times it's going to depend on the weather. If you start spraying based on a date and the weather warms up early, then that pest might show up a little bit early.
Gotcha.
Or if we have a long, cool spring, the pest might show up a little bit later. So you don't necessarily go by date. One of the examples that I wanted to use is crabgrass. A lot of us will say, well, I'm going to put down a crabgrass preventer so that I don't have crabgrass.
Right.
Well, if you've never had crabgrass in that area before, do you actually have a problem with crabgrass?
Right.
So is there a reason for putting that chemical down to prevent crabgrass if there's no crabgrass? And so scouting and monitoring, if you know you've had a problem with crabgrass before, then putting that prevention measure down, that preventative chemical down, is a good idea.
Okay. So basically, scouting it out first.
Right.
Look for the evidence, and in other words, don't predetermine that you're going to have the problem either with pest or weeds. You want to know that you have had experience in that area, and you can look for it in that particular area, but you still want to wait till you find it.
Correct.
Okay. And we're talking about integrated pest control or pest management. Actually, we're not trying to manage them. We're trying to get rid of them.
In some cases, we'll need to get rid of them. In some cases, it's just a matter of managing how bad or severe the problem becomes.
Okay. The other thing I've got to ask here is that a pest to us may be a good thing to birds or bees or things of this nature. So, do we at times, case in point, mosquitoes. But mosquitoes are very, very important to certain bird species. I think purple martin being one of them.
Purple martins eat a lot of mosquitoes. Bats eat a lot of mosquitoes.
Yeah,
so it's
you
really
need those mosquitoes.
It's really a matter of how much of the food chain do we want to interrupt.
Well, it's not only that. I'd rather them pick on the mosquitoes than me.
Well, yes.
And I grant you, we may be a little hard to carry away, but if enough bats or purple martins come after us, we may find ourselves being swooped up.
Well, that might be true. We're a little bit big for bats and purple martins, but you never know what might happen.
Exactly. All right. Integrated pest management.
Right. Okay. So we mentioned the first step, which is monitoring or scouting. So you have to make sure that you have the pest.
Right.
When you see that you have a pest, and that might be a weed, a disease, or an insect, then you have to make sure that you get proper identification. I all the time will get people that will call up and ask for a fungicide to control the powdery mildew on their plant.
Mm-hmm.
But when they send me a photo of what's going on, it can often be an aphid or a mealybug or some other insect that has a white fluffy coating on the outside of it. And so if I'm giving them just a fungicide, I've improperly identified the pest, and so I'm giving them the wrong kind of control. So properly identifying what that pest is helps you to be able to make sure that you're going to get the right control for that pest.
All right, that's an important aspect. Let's talk about how people can get hold of you to give that information. And by the way, with technology, I don't have to bring it into your office, do I?
A lot of times I can identify what the problem is through photos. If I get a clear photo
right.
that's close enough to be able to identify what's going on there.
Okay, and how would they get that information to you so you can give them that advice?
A lot of times if you'll call our office, and the phone number for our office is 252-222-6352, or if you want to call my line directly, it's 252-222-6364.
Okay.
And a lot of times if you'll give us a call first, then we can give you the email address to send it to. Sometimes I can understand what you're explaining. Sometimes the way you explain things and the way it appears in my mind aren't exactly the same.
Right. Okay.
And so it's always good to have an opportunity to send photos as well. And for Carteret County, if you want to send the photos to me, my email address is Shawn, SHAWN _Banks, BANKS @ncsu.edu.
Okay, and that NCSU is North Carolina State University, by the way, for anybody's interested. All right, scout it, identify it.
Correctly identify it. And then you need to learn a little bit about that life cycle. For example, the weeds that are out now, we would consider those pests. Well, if you're calling it a weed, it's probably considered a pest. And so you would need to identify what is the life cycle. Right now, a lot of those weeds are starting to flower. You've got pretty yellow flowers and white flowers and purple flowers. So they're in the part of their life cycle where they're in the reproduction mode.
Gotcha.
So spraying them with a chemical to control them right now isn't going to do a whole lot of good because they're already setting seeds for next year's crop. So if they're an annual weed, like, for example, henbit or
dandelion,
dandelion or chickweed, the ones that seem to be the big problems, then they're setting seed right now. So even if you kill them right now, they've already set seed for next year, so they're going to be a problem again next year.
Okay.
But if it's a perennial weed, for example, maybe a thistle that comes back year after year, sends up that flower and creates a problem, then you can then you know that it's going to be a problem. You can go ahead and kill it now to prevent it from coming back in the same place next year.
Okay.
Okay, so figuring out what the life cycle of that pest is, and is it too late or too early to spray? Another example that I'll give you is somebody had called me up late in the summer. I want to say it was August last year, and they called me up and they said, something has killed my lawn overnight, and it's killed about 3/4 of my lawn. It started in one corner, and within a week, it's taken over about 3/4 of the lawn. And so I helped them to walk through that. We figured out that it was fall armyworm. Fall armyworm, the larva hatches out. They feed for about a week and a half, and then they burrow down into the soil and they pupate. So by the time they called me, the fall armyworm, which is a caterpillar, was already in the pupal stage. So spraying with the chemical wasn't going to do any good. The damage had already been done. And so knowing what that life cycle is, how quickly it happens, and knowing when is the best time to make that application is going to be very, very beneficial.
Can you remediate the damaged area from that?
With the fall armyworm, once they've chewed the grass, what they've done, most of the time it's brand new sod that's been laid down. And once they separate the leaf from the root, if it's like a Bermuda grass that has some underground stems, some rhizomes that will send back up some more grass, then you'll be okay. If it's a grass like centipede or St. Augustine that doesn't have an underground root system or underground stem system, it's not going to come back once they've chewed it off and killed it, because they chew it off right at the soil level, separating the stem from the root system.
Okay.
So that's one of those. Once it's dead, it's dead and gone.
Okay, so much for Shawn Banks helping us out. Integrated tech pest management. All right, we've scouted it, identified it, determined its life cycle. What next?
The next thing that we need to figure out is, what is the threshold? At what point do I need to take action? A good example of that is the flea beetle that attacks eggplant. if you plant the eggplant, it's really small and the flea beetle gets on it right away, that eggplant's going to have a hard time getting up to flowering size. So you can handle 1 or 2 leaf holes in an eggplant, but when you start getting several in there, then you need to go ahead and spray so that plant can get tall enough to be able to reproduce. However, that's when you come to think of, okay, so how much damage can I tolerate? And with some plants, a little bit of damage, no big deal. With other plants that are going to be showpieces, you probably don't want any damage at all. And that's where the difference between a home fruit tree and an orchard where they're going to be selling that to the public. At home, I don't mind a little bit of cat facing, so I don't mind a few insects making some damage. However, if I'm on an orchard and I'm trying to sell this product, people have come to expect flawless fruit that doesn't have any spots or dings or damage, and so they're not going to purchase it if it's not perfect.
Okay, so tolerance is another issue. That's the 4th.
Yeah, so that's step 4 is the tolerance. And then number 5, once it's reached that threshold, then it's time to go ahead and do something to prevent it or to cure it. And that's the part where you choose the tactic. What am I going to do to get rid of this pest? For example, weeds in my lawn. I had 1 or 2 dandelions this year. My tactic was I don't want those in there, so I went out and I hand pulled them.
Okay. You only 1 or 2?
I only had 1 or 2 this year.
That's not fair.
I know. I've seen lots and lots of them this spring, and I'm like, whew, thank goodness I only had 2.
The other problem with dandelion is they during the summer they have this very broadleaf base that almost covers the yard and actually overwhelms the grasses.
And it can become a really big problem because if it's for grasses like centipede, if they shade out the grass, then it kills the grass in that area.
Yeah.
So that's one method of controlling them is mechanically going out there and pulling them.
Okay.
Let's go back to the eggplant and the flea beetle. If I know that I've had flea beetle in the past, I might put a physical barrier, such as a row cover, over the top of my eggplants when I put them out there, and leave that row cover over the top of my eggplants until the eggplant gets 6 to 12 inches tall, and then I can take that off, and then it's not going to matter if I get flea beetle.
What about sunlight? You don't have sunlight on it then, do you?
The row cover allows sunlight in and prevents it's a tight enough weave that it prevents the flea beetle from getting to the eggplant.
Okay.
But it allows the sunlight in. It's only like a 10 to 15% shade cloth. And so you're getting plenty of sunlight in, but the insects can't get to it. And then when it gets up to the size where it starts to flower, about 12 inches or more, I can take that row cover off, allowing the bees to get in, knowing that the flea beetle is going to get in there, but it's not going to cause enough damage.
That's where the tolerance comes in.
And that's where the tolerance comes in. Okay. And then the third one is chemical. If it's gotten to the point where I have to spray a chemical, I've gotten to the point where if I don't spray a chemical, it's going to kill the plant, then I can pick the best chemical. And a lot of times I would want to start with the least toxic chemical for that environment. And then if that doesn't work, then I work my way up.
All right. We're talking with Shawn Banks of Carter Cooperative Extension Agency. Very important conversation, and that is pest management or pest control. So you're out there with your whipping chair and you're whipping them and getting them to stand up and do whatever their tricks. That's
out there like a circus performer, not in my yard, not in my yard.
Exactly. Let's run through those 5 items very quickly. First is scouting.
First is scouting or monitoring.
Second was what?
Was proper identification.
Okay.
Make sure you're identifying the right insect or weed or whatever as the pest. Learn the life cycle. When is the best time to make that application? Determine the action threshold. So
the tolerance, how much I'm willing to accept.
How much damage can I handle in my yard? And then you choose the tactic, whether that's going to be a physical barrier, some kind of prevention method, or whether that's going to be mechanical, go out there and hand pick them off, or if it's going to be a chemical and then select the best chemical for the job.
Can't say enough about the importance of Carter Cooperative Extension Agency. There's an extension agent in every county. You're hearing this information applies wherever you are in North Carolina. And don't hesitate to Google. That's the simplest way.
Right.
You're a local extension agent. Shawn, as always, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.